If you look in some senses what we've tried to do, and we tried to, as I said yesterday, try and complicate it as we move deeper, we started with a collaborative structure. And in some senses, if you're going to build these kinds of cultures, you have to have some structure and some set of processes where the actors come together to own the journey together. And how that basically gets built out is in itself an adventure for some districts. Because in some senses, to go public with a joint labor management or labor management community committee to basically do some deep work around teaching and learning is sometimes itself a huge adventure. The second piece we did is in some senses start talking about the complexity, right, of what it means to say we're doing collaborative work, and to somehow pull that out, tease it apart, make it in some senses the complex thing that it is. The third thing we did yesterday was to basically say, what's the link? Because the real work gets done at the sites with teacher voice and in very concrete ways. If we're going to realign this thing, we're going to realign it not just in terms of content, but everybody in the room knows it's probably going to be a huge journey in terms of shift in pedagogy and shift in kind of deep engagement of children in a new kind of learning. And it will come with some pressure as the evaluations come and so forth. But the last piece from yesterday was to basically say, and here's the relationship that you want to think about around the district kind of opening this thing. And I tried to at least give some ideas around the fact that this is not a classic management, monitor, and control issue. This is just the opposite. What you want to do is join, if you can, publicly, internally and externally, to say, here's where we're going. The work is going to be done at the sites. Our work is to empower them with some parameters and resources to go do the work deeply. And as they do the work deeply, our job is to visit, if you will, in some deep sense. And I mean even physically. It's very powerful for you to show up at a site, all right, every Wednesday, visit a school, and for 2 hours, with the parents can come, kids can come, so ask them how it's going in terms of this work. Ask deep questions, and the next day, basically wire it out, put it out there, what it is you heard, what's going well, what isn't, and to kind of tell the truth out there. When you do that, it's not about that school, it's about the system learning and a collaborative kind of ownership of the journey. Those are huge shifts in culture, huge shifts. And the last kind of loop I want to make is when they experience, they being the folks who do the work at the sites, experience you listening, learning, empowering them to do this work and kind of realigning yourselves around it, they will give you permission to go further. If you don't have that experience of the sites, of collaboration down here, when you take that second step up here around doing collaboration, nobody in that system, having had the same experience, will say, oh, go ahead. The faculty will not give the union leadership permission. The principals will not go with that top leadership administratively, because unless they're making the same journey, they don't trust where you're going. So this is a system in the deepest sense, and to add a little more complexity to that, if you do not have a strategy for the parents in these days and age, particularly around this kind of stuff like core, whatever the core means to different folks out there, but unless the faculty, the external group is coming with you, they will basically pull you back as well. So this thing's a very complex system, and it's holding. And when you start to move it the way you're going to move it, around content, pedagogy, measurement, all right, and so forth, you've got to have a strategy so that they can move with you, so they let you take the next step, and so forth. So that's kind of the loop. So what we did is we got a wonderful question yesterday. At the end of yesterday, said, well, what about the accountability piece? All right? And there were a bunch of ways we could have gone, but one of the ways I decided to go was to simply say, well, accountability for what? All right, we're getting frozen here, and the accountability question comes in that very narrow testing in 2 content areas, perhaps in the narrowest possible definition. And basically, we start walking away very fast from, first of all, the academic pieces, the intellectual pieces, but we walk away from the developmental piece, the social justice piece, and the citizenship piece, in the sense that it's not overt. It's simply that we go dead, we go silent, and this takes all of our energy. And so what I think that question kind of occasioned was picking it up and saying, well, if we had our ability to talk about what we really think we're doing with children over this period of time, what would the words be? What would the areas look like? All right? And so what I think we're thinking, and I was talking to in the back and so forth, there's a whole lot of really interesting methodology out there, and folks who really know and spend a lifetime thinking about simply methodologies that are qualitative methodologies, that know how to measure and speak to in very deep and powerful ways, not quantitative stuff, but deep qualitative stuff. Also, we'll probably get some articles to you. An older article that basically said, you know, there's a place in a large system where the top of the system, looking at a national scene, probably has to know how fourth graders are reading. And you probably want a standardized test to tell you that. But the deeper you go into the reality, the more that's not interesting. What's interesting are the qualitative descriptors of the work of those children in sites. And it's not an either or. We could begin in here in the fall to start talking about, with the wonderful opening you've got, of building in some senses deeper layers of this that get more qualitative the deeper we get to classrooms and children learning. So we might kind of come with you on a kind of intellectual journey that says, you took us here, and so we might take the next step with you and simply using the curriculum committee kind of go deeper into qualitative methodological issues and let you drive the areas and see if we can get you some good theory and a couple of good practice research pieces. So that's kind of the intellectual journey. I want to add one more piece of complexity because I can't stand not to. All right? I just can't stand it. All right? So the last piece of complexity comes to this accountability piece in the following way, which is to say, when you have those layers that I drew, 4, 5 layers, federal, state, local, and so forth and so on, a certain kind of thing happens at, in quotes, the bottom. And I don't deliberately use that word, but there is a kind of a bottom when you layer, you know, this kind of triangle. And the problem is that the accountability language comes out of somebody setting goals and then saying, here are the measures, and so forth. I think the general rule, and I'm gathering a whole lot of work from Peter Block and others around this, but I think the right way to think about this is that if you're building a collaborative culture, there's another piece that comes with this, which is to say, how do you build real ownership of the goals and the measurements, as opposed to the piece that happens where 6 groups above us tell us what the goals are and the measurements and what it is we're going to do with that measurement. And here's, in some senses, the caveat in the system, and then kind of we ought to be struggling with what to do about it, all right? Which is the following. The danger of any hierarchy is that wonderful people in the management roles, traditionally, wake up every day thinking that they are responsible for the quality of the work and its productivity. That's what they're trained to do. They care deeply, and but you got a bunch of folks waking up doing that, all right, every day. And so they go into work sites across the country, and in some senses, the way they manage begins to feel like, to the people who do the work, as if somehow they, in the hierarchy, are responsible for the quality and the productivity, not me. All right? Now, they don't mean to say that, but by the way they manage it, there's a displacement of responsibility up. And if you got 3 and 4 layers doing that, all of a sudden it sounds to me like, well, if this principal thinks she's responsible for the quality of the teaching here, I wish her Godspeed. All right? I wish her good luck. That's the first displacement. All right? The second displacement is it's easier to let her take it. You know? Because I've lived 20 years in which she acts like she's responsible for it and so forth and so on. But I don't like the feeling, and this comes right out of Peter Block, I don't like the fact, not just that she took it or assumed that I couldn't do it, but I don't like the fact that I gave it away because it was the easier road. And so I end up with this kind of free-floating alienation and anger, kind of towards the system, but it's actually towards me. I'm just displacing it. And the reason I'm angry is I gave away the deep responsibility that comes with adult professionalism. I didn't give it away any given day. I just let this damn thing erode it. All right? And the craziest piece of this, I mean, think about this. Not only in some senses does this hierarchy kind of say, we're responsible, we're worried, and so forth, and I say, okay, you want it, you got it. But then every day he or she wakes up and comes in, and not only do they think they're responsible for the quality and productivity, they think they're responsible for motivating me to care. So all of a sudden, it also is assumed that not only do I not do the work and think about it, but I don't care anymore. So I got bunches of people waking up across the country trying to motivate me to do the work. And the last piece I would ask you to reflect on, because I'm trying to make it complex, is it would be deadly if that started to seep into pedagogy. Would it not be deadly if I cared so much about children that I taught in such a way that they thought I was responsible for their quality? All right? Because I would get, especially in little boys by the age of 12, but in general I would get it, in some senses, a deep and ongoing kind of resentment that somebody took away who I am and what it is I am responsible for. And if you want it, lady, good luck, make me do it. I just think that in some senses, hierarchy and control alienates the people from the work in such a deep way that if you're building collaborative cultures at deep classrooms and sites, you have to be conscious, not just you really have to be conscious of how you set up the issue so that accountability is not yours. The principal yesterday, I thought, did a wonderful job. In order to be responsible for a place like a school, you have to, the way to do that is to give it away. In the sense, you're responsible for creating a place where they can be. And if you teach, you're responsible for, in some senses, creating a place where children understand that it is their learning journey. They're not learning for you. It's their responsibility, it's their joy, it's their journey. The displacement around caring hierarchy is deadly. And it is, in some senses, some of the most subtle kind of alienation. And it comes out of caring. And so all I want to do is, in some sense, to keep making this more and more complex. This is not an easy journey to change the pedagogy, the content, and so forth. Now to expand what it is you're doing and start talking about qualitative measures to do it. And finally, to talk deeply around the fact that when you take professional voice, two things have to happen. You have to step forward in a way you haven't, but the hierarchy has to, in some senses, understand that is not only not loss of power, but deep kind of responsible action. I mean, this is the journey. This is the cultural shift. This is the deep empowerment piece and the risks that we all take on this. And, this goes back to some of, I was trained by Illich and Frere. God help us if we're using, under deep caring, this kind of teaching to, in some senses, enslave. Now, I know that's the most radical way you can say it, all right? But Illich was saying forever to us, you are not going, to me, he was saying, you are not going into Latin America thinking that you're teaching people to read and write, and what you're really thinking them to do is to do what they're told. Because if that's the alphabetation of the world, if that's what it means to read and write, I don't want you anywhere near peasants and poor people. You're not helping at all. You're getting them ready to give up their freedom and autonomy. Now, that's a crazy place to end. I simply say this thing's trickier than you think. And there's a deep, long-term history of planting this radically so that we think it through again in a powerful way.